Billings Tower, this is my fellow Montanans. We are on approach for runway 28 right, descending through 12,500 feet. We have information Zulu, and we are squawking 94.7 FM. Thank you for joining my fellow Montanans. I am Dr. Kyle Austin, owner of Farm 406, and we have a guest today. He's a youngin', probably the youngest that's been on this radio show anyway, but we have Jarrett Hopert here with us today. You got to get the mic up to your lips, sir.
Well, it's Jarrett Hoopert's.
Oh, Hoopert.
Yeah, I get that correct.
Is that a Hooterite name? Because that's just kind of weird to enunciate. You know?
I think it's German, French, something like that.
You don't even know where your name comes from?
Well, I looked it up one time, but that's about it.
Well, anyway, Jarrett is a Montana resident, born and raised in Montana, and here in Billings. He is an aviation student at Rocky Mountain College, right here in Billings, Montana. So Jarrett is joining us today so we can talk flying the big sky, because a lot of us see airplanes out there. Some of us fly it, but other times you just look up and you imagine what's going on in that aviation world. So Jarrett, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from? How'd you get into aviation? And how did you end up at Rocky?
So I am from Missoula, Montana. Go Grizz. I got into aviation. So in high school, Sentinel High School back in Missoula, there is a aeronautical engineering class. And so it basically just goes on over everything to do with aviation. It kind of gives you a little rundown about kind of the pilot stuff and unmanned aerial systems, but mostly kind of just on the engineering side. And so coming out of high school, I thought that I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. So I applied to MSU for mechanical engineering, and I wanted to do that. But as I got closer to going on to school, I realized that I'd rather be in the cockpit than sitting out on a desk doing nothing. Plus, I don't think I'm smart enough.
Well, I mean, you are smart enough, but there's days I kind of argue with you about that. Because, but anyway, Jarrett, so did you ever go flying before you got into aviation, or you just have like that little itch or that little hair on the back of the neck that said, hey, I want to be a pilot?
I mean, I kind of was a plane nerd, played a lot of video games with planes. I always thought of myself as just some guy who could totally fly an airplane. I didn't start any flights until after I got accepted to the Rocky Mountain aviation program and got my flight slot for the springtime. And so I decided back home when I was on break for the winter, I was like, I might as well probably get up there and fly. And I absolutely loved it. I flew to St. Regis, and I was like, this is amazing. He didn't let me touch the rudders at all, which is probably the best thing. But I did a little approach there. I also got to fly back to Missoula and do the approach there. And I was like, man, I'm such a great pilot, even though I didn't do anything.
Well, airplanes fly themselves anymore, right? With AI, and you got autopilot, and those pilots get up there and just push a button and they do nothing. And so it's interesting these days where aviation is going. But we want to do a little aviation history, a little bit about my history, because a lot of people that know me from running for Congress, they know me from being their pharmacist at Farm 406. They know that I have my pilot's license also, and I grew up flying in the big sky. And I didn't fly. Like, a good little story about me is I never was in an airplane growing up. My grandfather was a navigator in the Air Force, and he had little like airplane models and stuff like that on the farm. But I out of high school, I was going to join the Navy or the Air Force to be a MiG pilot, because Top Gun was one of my like favorite movies back in the day. And I'm like, man, I want to be Maverick. I want to be out there flying the fast airplanes over the oceans, having fun, shooting down the enemy, shooting down the bad guy. But instead, I ended up in pharmacy school. So I ended up in pharmacy school. And when I graduated, I regretted it. I was like, why didn't I go into aviation? I still had that little niche that said, I want to be a pilot. So I ordered the Jeppesen home study kit, and I self-studied to learn how to fly. And that's where we're going to go today, because you went down the track of going to a professional school. I went through a home school. So what I did is I read all the books. I studied the weather. I studied the workings of the aircraft and the terminology and airport operations. And then I rented an airplane and did my 40 hours and got my license. And then I bought my own airplane. So a little more freedom, a lot less expensive on the route I'm going. We'll talk about that a little bit later with Jarrett, because he's racking up the tuition bills at I don't really want to call it price gouging Rocky, but it's high price. We'll call it high price Rocky because you're paying a high price for education, but you'll come out with a commercial aviation degree over where I just have my GA. So let's move into a little history here, Jarrett. Jarrett was nice enough to put together today's educational history on Montana. So I'm going to let Jarrett take the lead on this, and then I'm just going to ask him questions and jump in once in a while. So Jarrett, take the lead here.
All right. So yeah, I put a little thing together. I just kind of wanted to talk about aviation in Montana. So it looks like, yeah, so the first recorded flight occurred in Helena in 1910. Not really much about happened. That one kind of flew around there. I think it was during a state fair. But in 1911, Cromwell Dixon became the first person to fly across the Continental Divide in his airplane, the Hummingbird. He flew. I think he came in. He was at State Fair, I think in Helena as well. He flew over the Continental Divide, just landed in a nice little airport on the other side, and they're like, "That's history right there." And then so after in the 1920s and the 40s, aviation kind of took off in Montana, and they realized that they need to start making some airports so they can actually get stuff going around in Montana, especially in that mountainous terrain and it's a big state we live in. Everything's got to get shipped around, especially with the mail. That was a big, huge pushing for airports and stuff because mail had to get there. And so, and then, yeah, and the companies like National Park Airways became in service during that time as well. And so, yeah, Montana also plays a big role in World War II as they trained bomber pilots, and I think it was Cut Bank. And then during the Civil or the Cold War, Great Falls had their nuclear capable bombers, and they had that big old air base that they still got there so that they could keep America safe.
Now we're going to back up here because I like history in Montana. But when we go back to 1910, where you said the first recorded airplane did a flight and it was recorded over Helen in 1910. Okay, back then they had no airports. These were small aircraft. They were landing backcountry in grass fields. And then you had the aircraft in 1911, which was a year later, that went over the Continental Divide. So back then, the aircraft that were in Montana were very small. They didn't have the horsepower and they couldn't get the altitude, I'm assuming. And that's what the delay was. I'm assuming. I'm not that old.
I'm going to assume as well because, yeah, flying in Montana, we had to deal with the high altitude, higher density because we're way above sea level. So, yeah, and then you had these little bitty airplanes, and they didn't go very far. They didn't go very fast. They couldn't climb like how we can now.
But if you go into the 1920s to the 40s here, now you got to ask yourself what was going on in Montana in the 20s and 40s. And a lot of it was a lot of homesteading. There was still homesteading going on at that time where people were moving to Montana, staking claims, building the farms, building those homesteads. And so Montana is really not that old with generations when you think about it. So that was going on in the 20s and the 40s. And then you get into the National Park Airways in the 20s. And in the 20s, we had Glacier National Park became a national park. It was, I think, like number 10 or something like that. But anyway, then you get into World War II. World War II was in the 40s. And that's what really drove a lot of the airports, like you said, across the state. And it wasn't just Cut Bank. I mean, you got Cut Bank that has bomber buildings. Havre had some bomber buildings. You go north of Malta, no, not Malta, Glasgow. There's a big old bomber station there. And then you had Great Falls, of course, which then was a nuclear capable bombing facility. But then the big one in the state, what's the big one, Jarrett? Let's see if you know Montana history. It's my favorite airport. It is the most, I know I'm from Havre, but Havre Airport's boring.
Havre Airport's boring. I bet it is.
Lewistown.
Lewistown. Oh.
Lewistown Airport. If you have not flown into Lewistown Airport, that place has a lot of history with the World War II nuclear capabilities, bombers, and it's a fun airport to go in and out of in general aviation.
They got that missile out there on that park, don't they?
But that missile's not going to get you. They don't care about you. So let's move into a little bit more here. So these airway beacons, Jarrett, go ahead and talk about these airway beacons a little bit.
So many years ago, airplanes had to fly at night because they had to get mail places. Well, back in the day, they didn't have the VOR, the GPS that we do now. So what they did is they stuck out, was in the beginning it was bonfires all across the nation that would guide these airplanes. But in the 1920s, they realized that they had to get a better solution. So they put up these air beacons all along these air routes all across the country. And Montana had 84 of them, which would be placed all along the air routes, usually kind of following the train tracks. And like now it'd probably be next to the highways. And so many years ago, they were like moving and navigation was getting better and they just didn't need them anymore. And so they started tearing them down all throughout the years, especially during the war. They needed the steel. And so about a few years ago, I think it was 2021, they decided that, hey, we're gonna get all rid of all the remaining ones we had. And so I think Montana has 17. Only a few of them are still operational. I have them listed behind me about the ones that we still have in the state. And I think the only one that I could find that was still going was the Spokane light, and then maybe one out by Butte.
Yeah, it kind of seems the ones that are left are on higher elevations, and they're probably used more for notifying pilots that there's a mountain there, so you don't hit the mountain. But back in, so like if you go back in the day, yeah, navigation, they didn't have radar, they didn't have all of this fancy stuff, they didn't have Salt Lake Center, so they had to fly around by the seat of their pants, and so that's what these lights were for, and they rotate, and we still have those at airports today. If you have a rotating beacon light at an airport. And it's actually kind of cool. I don't know if you know, but the light is angled upward on them. So when they're revolving, they're not shooting straight out, they're going upwards. So you can see it as a pilot. When that rotates around, that light will actually hit you in the cockpit and it catches your attention. So if like when I'm up in Havre and I'm night flying, I can actually see the beacon light on a clear, cold night from Great Falls, Montana, and that's 120 miles away. So that's the cool things about these lights is they didn't have to have a lot of them. They just had to have them every so often so you can see that as a pilot from the altitude that you're at. But it's actually a cool thing. It's still used at the small airports today. Like if you're flying into Havre, Montana, or one of those small airports, even what am I thinking of? Chinook. And you squawk your click button. What am I thinking here, Jared? You click your mic.
You click your mic.
You
Yeah,
click your mic 7 times.
Yep.
And it activates the airway lights on the runway. So your runway lights come on, your end beacon strobes come on, the airport light beacon will come on, and you can find that airport. And then after about 30 minutes with no activity on the radio, the lights shut off automatically. So that's kind of cool, a little part of aviation in Montana. So let's move on. Next slide here. So anyway, a little break here. For those listeners out there, Farm 406 is Montana's vaccination destination. It is vaccination time this time of the year, and we offer Get a Brew, Not the Flu. So with every flu shot offered at Farm 406, you get your choice of a $5 Mazevo gift card, or you can get a wooden nickel to go to Canyon Creek Brewery and get a good local brew. Anybody not in the Billings area, you are free to come to Billings and join into the fun, because that's how Montanans take care of Montanans. You do business with a Montana business, I buy you a beer as a way of saying thank you. No one else does that. Those big corporations don't do it. Farm 406 is open 7 days a week with walk-in, no appointments for their vaccines. And you know what? A lot of you out there that follow me, Farm 406 has opened its second location in Butte, Montana. So if you got friends out there or you're over in Butte, stop in on Harrison Avenue. Check out this Farm 406 Butte location. We have a coffee shop, a soda station, and all the same great services we offer right here in Billings, Montana. All right, Jarrett, let's get back into some general aviation here.
So actually, speaking about for a lot of the private airstrips you'll see around are actually due to farms. And then so yeah, Montana has 120 public use airports. My favorite one is KMSO, Missoula. Very great airport. I've only flown there a few times, but I do like it. Not a big fan of Billings. But so according to
wait, I'm going to interrupt you because I don't like the Missoula airport, and I actually like Billings Airport more than Missoula. So why don't you like the Billings Airport?
My thing is, why do you like the Billings Airport so much? I mean, like, so you know how I think Missoula is a class Delta,
right?
So there's no approach, there's no departure. So you're just talking to tower, and then they're telling you to switch over, and you're kind of having that freedom, just kind of flying in that airspace without having to
Well,
you
that's
know?
because Missoula Tower is lazy, so they don't have the control tower like Billings does. So they always patch you over to Coeur d'Alene or no Spokane Center.
Yep.
Yep, they always transfer you to Spokane Center because they're lazy people. Where in Billings, we do it all. We have the smart guys here. Even though some of those control tower guys up there, they've led me the wrong way, and I'm like, you idiot, But they were probably having a busy day, and I'm just like, what are you talking about, But you got to correct them, that we work together as a team up there because they're there to help you, and I'm there to help them. So anyway, let's get back to the general aviation in Montana. So we have 120 plus public airports, which isn't very many, but 400 plus private strips. And have you flown into a private strip before?
Well, no, I've not flown to a private strip because you're not allowed to. Well,
As
I
a
mean, you are.
student, you're still a student.
Yeah. Also, I think you need permission to get on those strip anyways. But yeah.
Well, not all of them. So there's actually, it's a Meadows. It's very popular over in the Rocky Mountains. What am I talking about? You know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about that like really high altitude airport or like airstrip.
Yep, everyone flies into. It's a
Very
secret
scenic.
little scenic place.
Oh,
Take your
it's-
fishing pole.
Take your
But I
fishing
mean, it's like it's the good getaway. So when you're flying and you got your general aviation and your own airplane, you can go to these cool spots that nobody else can go to.
You ever
And
gone to like those back mountain strips out there?
no, I don't have like a Cub or anything like that. My Archer, I baby it. It's like it stays on the paved
It
runways.
stays on the table.
Yeah, the pavers. But anyway, keep going here on this general aviation.
So it looks like we in Montana we about have almost 5,000 pilots, about 4,705, and then we have 4,712 registered aircraft. So not a very busy airspace we have around here, but there is about 500 daily general flights. That's not counting the commercial flights. It's probably a lot less than that, but people are out there flying every day.
But a lot of general aviation people, they fly within 20 miles of their home base. There's some statistic out there where they only fly, around 20, 30 miles around their home base. They don't do cross country. And that's one of the, I don't know if it's a fear of theirs or if they just have no reason of going that far. But I always get, when I go out with the CFI and they look at my logbook and I'm flying back and forth between Billings and Havre, it's 170 nautical miles. And they're like, man, you get more cross country time in than you do local time. And it's impressive to them because it's a complete opposite of what they normally see with a lot of general aviation guys. A lot of guys will just go jump in their airplane and they just go up and buzz around for an hour and then they land and put it away and they stare at it and man, that's a pretty bird. Especially here in Billings, there's a lot of rich guys that I think they just have an airplane for bragging rights. They just don't actually fly it. There's one eye doctor I know that I'm not going to say his name, but he turned his hangar into a man cave, and it just has tons of cool toys in it.
That's what I would want to do. I mean, like the reason why I like Missoula too is like I wouldn't be going across country. That would be just be flying around those mountains, looking at the Bitterroot Valley and taking it all in. But Billings, you don't really got much to look at right here.
Yeah. So with general aviation in Montana, though, one of the things people don't understand is where does the funding come from? Have you gone through that in school yet, where the funding comes
Are
from?
you talking about like the fuel tax?
Well, they got fuel tax, but how the funding is dispersed among all the airports, because you have your different classes of airports. Okay. So like Billings is in its own class, and then you got Havre, which is its own class. But how the funding is the FAA gives out so much funding to a general pool, to the Montana Department of Transportation Aeronautics Division. Okay, and so this gets really interesting. So each airport is entitled to only $100,000 a year off the FAA funding. Now they can use it or they can loan it to another airport. So this gets kind of quirky where, all right, if I'm in Havre and we decide not to use our $100,000, I can leave it in the pool and use it for another day and let it accumulate, but then I can loan it to another airport that has a project. And then that airport has to pay it back. And then at some point, my money pools up and then I can do a big project. So that's where some of the money comes from. And then other money comes from county taxes. So if you pull your tax form out, you're getting taxed all the time on that airport. Now, if it's a city like Havre, it's a city county. So that means city taxes have to come into play, county taxes come into play, and then landing fees. Then you get into where anything over, I believe it's like 9,000 pounds, your aircraft, they can charge you a landing fee. And that airplane is required to pay that. So Billings, being an old international airport, It's still named international, but they don't have international flights connecting anymore. You have to go through Minneapolis or Seattle, but they actually charge the big aircraft landing fees. We'll get into this a little bit more and take a little bit further later on, but that's where the money is generated from. So there's a lot of different pools on it. There's some grants and stuff out there as well that's awarded to the FAA, but a lot of it comes from federal dollars.
Huh.
So just kind of think about that when you guys are out there like, man, I hate paying federal taxes, but we benefit big time in Montana from the federal taxes for our airports. All right. So why don't you go ahead and go on to this next thing here, because you're a Rocky guy. So let's learn a little bit about the history of Rocky Mountain College.
Yeah, I got to plug the college a little bit. So yeah, aviation has a huge and long roots in Rocky Mountain College. So in about the 1930s, the college became a part of a program that they would pay the school. I think it was $60 per student that they could get trained as a pilot, so they'd be able to be ready for military service. And so when the war came, they'd be able to get all these pilots going. And then I think Charles Lindbergh came to Montana and he inspired a lot of Billings kids, and they made a little model about it. And I think it's on a picture on the wall. But a lot of the after the war, they still they kind of steered away from the aviation like training. I mean, they still kind of had it, but for a long time it kind of went away. But then there was an aviation club, the Flying Bears, and it kind of brought it back up. And there was also a parachuting club too. But so the school really needed more programs. So in 1988, they decided to add the aviation major back, and so they started to get it going. And then in the 2000s, they actually got a fleet. I think it was out in Laurel they had it going, and then finally, a few years after, they came back to Billings and they had their own hangar, which we're currently still using. And so Rocky Mountain College offers aeronautical science major and aviation business. Aeronautical science is the one that's kind of the pilot one. Aviation management is if you want to be working for airports. They also have the unmanned aerial systems, which is like if you want to be a drone pilot. And so it's a 4-year program. You'll get your private, your instrument rating, you'll get your commercial, and then you have the chance of getting CFI, and all through that, just through the school. It is quite expensive because you are paying for the 4-year degree, but compared to, as you'll see in the next slide, compared to other schools like Gallatin, it is a little bit cheaper. And it also is AABI accredited, which is, I think it's one of 35 in the country. So it's a big deal. And they also get the FAA credits, and then you get the restricted ATP. So you become a commercial pilot at 1,000 hours. So you can go apply and work for the big boys.
The big boys. It's very tough. It's not easy to go to work for the big boys. So let's talk about how, when you got into school, how long did it take? Like, what was it like being a student at Rocky Mountain College when you started last semester?
Yes, or I guess last year. So my freshman year coming in the fall. So I was not guaranteed a flight slot, and so they told me that I have to compete with it. So my grades were very dependent on if I got a flight slot or not. So we had the or private ground that you'd go through, and it was just teaching you all the way up everything you got to know just to pass a test. And that was it. It was just a class to pass the test. You also had there was a professional aviation class that just kind of taught you how to be a professional aviator and how to dress nice and how to set the dinner table. And but the main focus was getting that private ground school, passing it, and being able to pass your FAA written, and so you could actually start flying.
So the joke, when you said the Flying Bears, the the joke that came across my mind, or the image, was the old saying, "When pigs fly." So I kind of wonder if they got their, the Flying Bears,
When
is
Batland Bears fly.
the flying pigs, something like that. But let's go back to Montana Aviation, because a lot of people don't know that the Montana Department of Transportation has an aeronautics division, and that's where the funding and stuff comes from. But they really promote two things: safety and education, and airport and airways. So they got two different divisions there. And I went to one safety and education course that was up in Havre, where the safety guy was going around. He had a nice little meeting with the local pilots, And he asked me, Kyle, what's one thing that you do to to fly safe in the state of Montana? And I said, well, I every 2 years when I have to take a CFI up and do my biannual check ride, I find a new CFI. And all the pilots looked at me because they know their CFI. They go back to them every 2 years because they feel comfortable with it. They know what that CFI is going to ask them. They know what that CFI is going to challenge them on. And I said, no, I get a different one every 2 years because everyone has a different pearl. They ask different questions. They challenge you on different techniques. And I do that to improve my flying habits and maybe get rid of some bad habits also. So, anyway, talking about those bad habits, my fellow Montanans, we are going to taxi for departure into a short break and we will be right back. Billings approach. This is my fellow Montanans requesting permission to taxi to runway 28 left via Golf Hotel for departure. We have information Foxtrot. And my fellow Montanans, you are back in the house with Jarrett, a student at Rocky Mountain Aviation, but he's here today wearing a Grizzly shirt, not a Bears shirt. So you're going to get the, I don't know if I have the right button here. Maybe not, but no, not that one. Oh, there it is. There it is.
I got to support the only Bears in the state that matter.
So anyway, let's get back to aviation because we were talking aviation and a little history on there and some of the stories that I've gone through in the private GA because I never went to a professional school like he is because I wanted to save my money and he has money to blow. So he's going to Rocky Mountain College. But also I got my pilot's license a lot quicker because the amount of time that you've been in school already, or when I did it back in the day, I got my pilot's license within 6 months and bought my airplane within 6 months. And you've been going to school for 18 months now.
Yeah, but I've only been flying since I guess January.
But see, you could have fast tracked it by just skipping school.
Yeah, but I wanted that for a degree.
But see, that's where, I was talking about like that's why people aren't going to college no more because college seems like they drag things out and kids are just getting burnt out. They're like, I don't want to go another 6 years to pharmacy school. I don't want to do 8 years to be a doctor. I don't want to do 12 years to be a surgeon, even though us consumers, we want our doctors to know what they're doing. But the thing is, I think we can fast track a lot of this because I think a lot of colleges like Rocky Mountain College or the University of Montana, they did it to me. They drag things out to keep you there as a victim of their high tuition prices. And so I really feel pharmacy school could have been done in 4 years. That's my personal opinion, but maybe there's some idiots out there that just can't absorb stuff like a sponge and they need 6 years, but they make everybody else go through that pain. So anyway, let's move back to aviation. What is this slide about, Jared, that you put in here?
So I kind of did a little comparison about so we have Rocky Mountain College, we have the Galveston College, and then just the Part 61 training here. So I was just kind of listing like the pros and cons a little bit, just kind of like the comparison between each. Because you go to Rocky Mountain, you get a bachelor's degree in aeronautical science or aviation management. And Gallatin College, I think it's an associate's degree in aviation. It's like business. You do a business degree. It's not that hard, I don't think. A lot of people, I've never heard anyone complain about it. I've heard people complain about the prices there though. And then, but like if you go Part 61 route, you don't need no degree. You just get up in that airplane, you fly. But so with going through college, you get the Part 141 benefits like you get the credits, you get the restricted ATP, so you become a commercial pilot, or I should say like to work for the big boys. So like United, Delta, stuff like that. But Part 61, you kind of have to wait that 1,500 hours and you got to build up that time. And usually with the flight hours at the colleges, it's a little bit lower. hopefully you're coming out with your PPL in 35 hours. I think I only have about 20 something, and I'm pretty close. I'm about a month out. And I'm not sure how it is at Gallatin College because it is a fast track program. I know you're supposed to be getting a cert every like 6 months or so. Because I know some people that they got their instrument and they have their private just done in just 1 year, and then they're working on their commercial and stuff like that. And then, so as how many hours did it take you to get your PPL?
So I did the 20 hours. So I did the shortest possible. And so we'll back up here in a minute, but in the FARs, for a private pilot, it's 20 hours of dual, and that means you have to go fly with a certified instructor, a CFI, so a certified flight instructor. And then after he signs you off after 20 hours, then you can go solo, and you have to put 20 hours of solo in. And then after 20 hours of solo, if you're comfortable, your CFI is comfortable, you can go do a state check ride, is what we called it back then, a state check ride. And good old Charles out of Lewistown, Montana, did my check ride. And I got some cool stories about, Charles is a good guy. He was a helicopter pilot, but he did a lot of sign-offs on a lot of Montana pilots. Very great guy. Know him very well. But anyway, let's go back to, but it only took me 40 hours. And then I got my license. People don't know what Part 61 and Part 141 and you say PPL, we know it's private pilot license, and then you got CPL, which is commercial pilot's license, but listeners don't know that, so we got to elaborate a little bit. But where do these parts come from? Can you explain that?
They come from the rule book that the FAA published and stuff. So Part 41 it's just kind of because it is it's
The
a for
Bible.
hire. It's the Bible.
I call it the Bible. So when you're a general aviation or even a commercial pilot, it's the FAR Bible. The flight, what does it stand for? Flight Administration Rules, or
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
something like that.
The FAR aims.
The FAR and the aims, and it's a Bible, because everything in there you need to know about flying safely and the rules of aviation are in there. And I actually read the whole thing. Jared, have you read the whole thing from front to back?
I have some of it tabbed out.
Tapped out. No, but I was hired by Walmart as their pharmacy manager in Havre when they opened, and that pharmacy was so slow, and that's when I bought that Jeppesen kit, and I just sat in there on Walmart's dime, getting paid by Walmart to study all the FARs, and I studied weather. I became a weatherman almost out of that's the thing about pilots, is you learn a lot of weather.
Yeah.
And have you gone through those courses yet, so you can identify your types of clouds?
I'm always on my phone looking at the weather. I'll yell at my phone if I see a convective segment coming in when I'm supposed to fly.
Well, so like when you get in your vehicle, what's one of the things you do? You put on your seatbelt, you go through like a mental checklist. You should anyway. But before you get in the airplane, what is the first thing you always do before you even think about flying?
Obtain the weather.
You check the weather. And so you become that weatherman, where you're looking at the weather, you agree with it, disagree with it, and then you call into flight service. Or nowadays you can jump on an app and you can get your NOTAMs. What else can you get on there?
You can get everything on ForeFlight. That's what I use.
So you use ForeFlight, and that's where a lot of the people, but I still call flight service. I like to call the 1-800 number, and you get someone on there, and you can talk about winds aloft. And winds aloft is one of those cool things, because having a small airplane in Montana, the winds change when you're flying from Billings to Havre or even Billings to Missoula, depending on the mountains. And so I always ask, hey, what's my winds aloft at 6,500? And then I'll always ask him, what's the winds aloft at 8,500? And what you'll find is there's an air exchange usually in there. And if you can find your tailwind, you can improve your fuel economy and your time to destination by picking a tailwind at your altitude. So you can use it to your advantage. And so there's a lot of cool stuff out there that you can gain from the weather. But then the one thing people don't like is turbulence. And so you're sitting there, and like on ForeFlight, they got the little flags, and you can see a little flag, and it'll tell you, wind gust and turbulent and, pilot report. But when I fly from here to Havre, there's not a lot of pilot reports. There's none. And so, I start flying along, and I hit some turbulence, and I usually hit that turbulence right outside of Lewistown as you're hitting those big snowies and you're going across those mountains right there. It gets turbulent. So what I'll do is I'll change my altitude. or I'll change the direction and sometimes go around them. So there's a lot of cool little techniques when you're flying out there. But anyway, was there more on this slide we want to talk about, Jared?
If you want, there's not too whole lot. It's just kind of more of it's just kind of going into how the colleges are more structured, and when you're just doing it by yourself with the CFI, it's just kind of more flexible. You're allowed to do it at your own pace and stuff like that.
So what does a student, if he sticks it through it with Rocky, accumulate for tuition and fees to get a commercial pilot's license?
So I'm not sure if I put this on the slide or not. I don't think so. So about you're getting about 100. I think mine was like estimated $180,000.
That's what I was gonna say. I had a friend that he went through it and they got out. Now, this is the thing: is you get out of Rocky with your commercial, you have $200,000 racked up in tuition expenses. And a pilot, now this is the thing: is that's more than me going to pharmacy school. That's more than a doctor going to doctor school. $200,000 racked up. When you come out and you're a new pilot, you have to accumulate hours and rank basically to get up to fly with the big boys, as you said, to fly those big airplanes. You have to work your way up and log hours. And so to get into, is it 1,000 hours to get into a commercial airplane with passengers?
It is, but usually you're not getting hired at 1,000, especially in this market.
So like Cape Air, everyone knows Cape Air in Montana. It used to be Cape Scare, Cape Scare. But those are the younger pilots that are accumulating hours. So they jump in and they do the puddle jumping, and they even fly cargo when they get out of school. But those salaries are only like 30,000 a year.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about Rocky Mountain is they do have a lot of connections with regional airlines. So they won't give you a job, but they'll set you up for hopefully a path where you can get somewhere.
So how long does it take a average student to become captain status of Delta?
Captain status. I think it all has to depend on the hiring market and stuff because you have a lot of, I'd say, more recent graduates at Rocky, and most of the time they're shooting for a job at Rocky to CFI, but they're only about 200 hours and they got to get way more. So they're just sitting there getting paid like $22 an hour with a lot of student debt. And so they're just trying to fly as much as they can. But once you get to that 1,000 hours, like there's a lot of jobs. I think one guy at Rocky, I think he's working for the Border Patrol now, and they pay pretty good at the Border Patrol.
Right, but how many hours or years? Because the kids out there listening to this are parents that they have kids wanting to, want to be a pilot. It's not that you can go to school, you get out in 4 years and you can go fly a Delta aircraft. You literally are a co-pilot, your second seat for almost 10 years before you gain that captain status.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right.
And so that's something you might want to look into, because it's like, man, yeah, I go to school for 4 years to be a pilot, but I'm not really in control for another 10 years. So because you're still learning.
Yeah.
You have to learn those big planes because they fly a lot different than the small planes, the puddle jumpers like I got. So there's a lot to aviation. And so let's talk about the crashes, because I don't think we had a slide about crashes.
I think I had some hazard stuff.
It's always funny when I'm flying commercial nowadays. I'll turn, you got the TVs on the back of the seats and I'm playing Why Airplanes Crash. And you get the people next to you in the seat, like, do you really have to watch that while we're flying? I'm like, no. I love watching Why Airplanes Crash, because if you study why airplanes crash as a pilot, hopefully you have a takeaway that you learn from them. And so it's always on departure. What do you do on departure when you're departing a runway? You make sure you keep your right rudder in there. And then you watch your altitude and your climb speed, because you don't want to stall out. But if you don't have enough rudder, what happens? The P force of the engine will flip that airplane upside down and drive you right into the ground. So you keep that right rudder in there, and you see what I'm saying? So you learn that, because a lot of crashes happen on departure and on arrival. And so those are the important things out there. But why airplanes crash in Montana? So you study a lot about this in Rocky, and I think they already talked to you a lot about that. But tell us, what kind of stories have they told you about why airplanes crash?
Actually, they did talk to us about a lot. So most of plane crashes, especially for general aviation, is ruled out with pilot error. And there's a whole lot of things that can be accounted. Like there's any, um, a lot of the time, like drugs, alcohol might have to do with it. I remember we had to hear a story about how some guy his cabin was filling with CO2 and he passed out and he crashed because he was unconscious. And then there's the kid at Rocky who crashed into the mountains because he put direct enter, didn't correct because he took off a different runway than he planned to, and he crashed straight into a mountain. But he did survive, so that's good. Apparently, he's flying at Delta, so you do get one crash.
They give you one crash. Every landing is a crash landing, and so it's just a matter of do you walk away from it, not walk away from it? Can you fly the airplane and can't fly away? But in Montana, we have the flatlands, which is different flying. But then when you get into the mountains, a lot of pilots don't realize, again, which way the wind's blowing. And if you're flying into that wind that's coming over the mountain, on the back side, so let's say the wind's blowing over the mountain, on the back side of the mountain, that current will suck you into the mountain. Yeah. And that's what happens with a lot of small airplanes. They don't have the power to pull out of that. And a lot of student pilots do not know how to correct for it. And that's the one question I asked a guy a long time ago, because I grew up to fly in the flatlands. And I grew up to fly in the wind because my flight instructor said every time we'd go out, he's like, called me up. He's like, hey, the wind's blowing. I was like, yeah, it's 20 knots. And he's like, good, let's go. Because if you're going to fly in Montana, you got to know how to fly in the wind. But one of the main questions I asked was, if I'm going to fly in the mountains, what's the one thing I need to know? And that's the one thing he told me. You got to watch that downdraft because it will suck you. And the first thing people, normal instinct is to pull up. And when they pull up, what do? You lose airspeed. And then it just sucks you into the mountain. So you want to do a 180 and you want to go with the wind, get your airspeed back, and then climb. People don't know that. And so that's where the crash is. Now, I'm going to flip the story a little bit here because I read a story today on Q2 because there was a recent airplane crash in Red Lodge. And those of you up there listening in Red Lodge, I want you to go look at the story and call, this is a pet peeve. Okay. Airports in Montana were built outside the city limits, away from houses, away from people for the reason. What happened? Missoula did the same thing. They built houses around the airport. And then you have these people complaining about aviation noise. They're complaining about safety because an airplane crashed. So this idiot up in Red Lodge, he's in Q2 News talking about how, we're concerned about safety because it almost hit my house. Well, buddy, that airport was there way before, so maybe you should have been concerned about safety before you either bought a house next to the airport or you built that house next to the airport because you thought it was cool. Oh, my house is right next to the airport. Because that happened in Missoula. They approved all these subdivisions out there when I was going to college because the airport was out by itself. And then all these houses grew. And then all of a sudden you start seeing these people complaining about the noise and complaining about the aircraft. And then they're worried about, what if that airplane crashed into my house? It's like, well, you're the idiot for moving there. So don't blame the airport, blame yourself. And that's kind of where I want to go with this, is because aviation is actually, you hear about all the crashes and stuff, but aviation is actually very safe. Very safe. It's actually more safe than driving to work every day because you got all these other idiots that don't know how to drive their cars.
Most dangerous part of a flight is driving to the airport.
Well, I guess probably, yeah, driving to the airport. TSA, I don't know. TSA I think gave me some hemorrhoids once in a while. I mean, patting you down, you're like, man, this is such a pain in the butt. It gave, all right, hemorrhoid joke. So anyway, let's talk about people. My followers like my government ridiculous. So we're going to take aviation into some government ridiculousness here before we end the show. So Jarrett, talk about some of the government ridiculousness that you've seen in aviation so far.
So I kind of just looked up some stuff, especially I try to make it more local to Montana. So, but I guess in 2025, Montana legislation passed the use of ADS-B out, which is an important device for safety. So people know, or ATC can find your elevation, how fast you're going, where you're going, and everything like that, so they can relate to other aircraft. So apparently, people in Montana were very not pleased with the fact that someone was taking the information gathered from the ADS-B and they were taking all the information, and so they would tax you on your landing fees because they would just take all the information from your flight and just without your knowledge.
So this isn't really government ridiculous. It's actually the government doing the good thing, because for those of you that don't know, this is invasion of privacy. Someone was invading the privacy of Montanans by using something that was required. So our federal government, for those of you that don't know, about 10 years ago required all aircraft to install an ADS-B in or an ADS-B in and out, or I mean out or an in and out. So you can go both ways. And what that does is it's a new type of tracking, and it's a GPS tracking that runs off of cell phone towers. So you can tell it's like a radar almost without radar, but it's like radar. So every aircraft out there will send a signal, and it says who you are, your altitude, so other aircraft can see you, control tower can see you. And then like my aircraft, I installed the Garmin ADS-B in and out so I can see other aircraft around me, and it tells you the tail number. And you can take the tail number and you can go to the FAA website and you can look up the owner of it. And that's what these people were doing. And so House Bill 571 in the state of Montana passed and it got signed into law. It didn't hit the news because, again, there's only 4,000 pilots out there, which is a small chunk of change. And so it's not big news. But in the pilot world, this is huge on protecting our privacy. So anyway, Jarrett, we got a few minutes left here. So we'll speed through some of these slides here and get going for departure.
All right.
So let's see here. Let's go on to government ridiculous. I want to jump into this because Tim Sheehy, our senator, let's hit this one. So tell us about Tim Sheehy and his national parks.
Okay, so Tim Sheehy, almighty aviator that he is. So he called for the end of Forest Service aircraft inspections. So inspections that were on aircraft that were operating for the National Forest Service. And so he thought they were useless, while others argue that it's very crucial for ensuring safety of these aircraft.
So let's go back here because Tim Sheehy owns a firefighting outfit called Bridger Aerospace out of Bozeman.
Yep.
And anyway, he went on to be a senator. So here he's trying to pass laws that benefit his industry, and it has a personal impact. But if you go back into the history, so the FAA does their inspections and they have airworthy certificates to make sure that your aircraft was airworthy. But what they saw is they had shady contractors out there fighting fires that were crashing airplanes. So the national parks and it wasn't the national parks. Was it the Forest Service came out and said, look, we're going to inspect these airplanes before they can go out and fight fires because it's a safety issue. Tim Sheehy doesn't agree with that. He wants to remove that safety barrier. And that's where it's under scrutiny here, because you have something that was a cause and effect. There was issues where you had shady pilots and bad aircraft out there crashing and creating rescue situations in a fire force that's on fire. And so the Forest Service comes out and said, "Nay, we need to do another double check for safety." And Tim Sheehy wants to remove that. I can see both sides of this story. I can agree with him and I can disagree because I don't like government involvement in a lot of things. But on the flip side, Tim Sheehy's argument is that the government delays the response time to get to the fires. Okay. I grew up in a day when fires were not to be suppressed until they reached a certain size, because back in the 70s, Yellowstone National Park did a study that most wildfires that were created in the wild extinguish themselves. So taxpayers are like, why are we spending all this money to send airplanes out to suppress it when 78% of them put themselves out themselves? So again, yeah, Tim Sheehy wants to make money off the taxpayer because he wants to jump the gun and go put out these small fires. But do we really need to put them out while they're small? And so I don't know if you had this conversation in aviation school. You know, I'm sure aviation school at Rocky is saying, hey, we want our pilots and our planes to be safe. And that's the priority. And that's the priority of the FAA. That's the priority of the Montana Aeronautics Division, is safety first. Because every pilot has a responsibility to inspect the aircraft. So if they're going and jumping in a bucket of rust and crashing, aircraft. Now, the other reason I saw on this is why they want to have this extra level inspection that the FAA doesn't have, is because the FAA doesn't inspect fire suppression equipment that's on these aircraft. but the Forest Service does. And so they're inspecting things the FAA doesn't require on those airworthy certificates. So that's my argument too on why we want to keep the Forest Service inspecting those. Good.
Yeah, I like how you kept saying shady and just kept thinking of Sheehy.
Shady Sheehy. Well, you got to be careful because I reached out to one of his staffers on this before we came on the show because I knew you wanted to talk about it. I reached out to him and asked for some insight, and they didn't really give me any insight.
He's also a big donor at Rocky.
Well, anytime you have money, you buy your way. And so he probably gets invited to some of those fancy dinners that the president of Rocky and everybody had. They do it like it's like a black tie event that they do once a year here with to go showboat around.
He
but
came into the classroom one day last year and he was like, "I'm Senator or Tim Sheehy running for senator."
I think it's like $10,000 a plate too.
$10,000.
I think it's like $10,000 a plate. Maybe it's only 1,000, and I just added a zero, but it's expensive.
I think they make Rocky kids work that, like they make you wear blue jeans and a black top.
I think you look good as a busboy.
I was a busboy.
So anyway, aviation in Montana, we're going to wrap this up here, but aviation in Montana has played a huge role in our economic infrastructure. And if you've seen what happened in Billings when Billings Airport was international, helped grow Billings, but now you can see what happened in Bozeman after that airport has increased its capacity and people just come and go and it's bringing people in. And I don't think that's good for Montana. Like, I think if we need to keep people out, we need to downsize our airports, even though it's nice to be able to jump in an airplane and go to Disneyland. But I think, I don't know, it's the people coming in. And I think with our landing fees, I think we should charge passengers coming in that's not a Montana resident a fee.
I mean, well, the state does generate a lot from tourism, and the increased growth in Bozeman is helping support that tourism. Especially,
but we should charge the people flying in a landing fee.
Landing fee.
Or
out of staters, how do you think that would go over?
Well, now we got me on another topic about tickets, because I kind of feel like when people buy a ticket, they should be charged by their weight. You know, I mean, you get on a scale when you're buying your ticket, and your ticket is based on weight because that airplane performs based on the weight.
It's all about weight and balance.
And so those 300-pound people that take up 2 seats is buying 1 seat. Now they're paying for 2 seats, but they're paying by weight. It's kind of like the produce section. You can just imagine. Yeah, never mind. We'll get going here. But so anyway, thank you for listening to My Fellow Montanans. Remember, united we stand, united we can. Follow me on youtube.com at My Fellow Montanans. You can listen on 94.7 FM or the Mighty 790 AM, or listen live anywhere in the world at mighty790.com. If you'd like to be a guest sponsor, advertise on the show, email me, Kyle, at farm406.com.